Thank you so much for joining me for this week's Object Talk. My name is Emma and I'm an Engagement Officer at the Jewish Museum at London. Now, this week's Object Talk is the second of our December Object Talks, and leading it today is our volunteer, David. Now, David has volunteered at our museum for about 4.5 years. During that time, he has welcomed visitors to our galleries and delivered spotlight spiels on the objects he has chosen to talk about today. Our theme for December is light, and the objects all link to an organisation that has been bringing light through education for many years. So, David, I will hand over to you to introduce your objects and tell us more about a very important organisation.
Thank you, Emma, and good afternoon, everyone. And here we are in the museum's, well, here we are virtually in the museum's history gallery, and in an area which I'm going to call the Jews Free School Triangle. That's because there are a number of items in the vicinity, all of which are concerned with the Jews Free, or JFS as it is now officially known, a pivotal institution in the history of England's Jewish community. The items here fall into a sort of a triangular shape, although in all honesty, you might have to employ some creative thinking to see that bit of geometry. But let's begin by having a look at two pictures in front of us, photographs of the pupils of the school as they were in the early years of the 20th century. But before we go on, just let me say something about why this area is of particular interest to me. You see, I joined the staff of JFS in 1986 as deputy head teacher. I thought I'd be there for a few years before moving on, but 29 years later, in July 2015, I retired from the noble teaching profession, still deputy head of JFS. In JFS speak, I was one of the lifers. Now, I loved my time at the school. I feel privileged to have worked there, and JFS remains a very special place for me. As they say, you can take the boy out of JFS, but you can't take JFS out of the boy. Oh, and by the way, the JFS triangle should not be confused with that other famous triangle, the one in Bermuda. Whereas the Bermuda Triangle is an area of the Western Atlantic where many young people are said to have actually mysteriously disappeared. In the JFS triangle, generations of teachers, or so it was rumoured, hoped that certain young people would disappear, mysteriously or otherwise. There's also an even more vicious rumour that the pupils enthusiastically shared these same hopes with regard to some of their teachers. And just before we get going, one other thing, if I may. JFS's school motto is Ora Vikar, which is Hebrew for light and honour. So it seems we've got a double whammy today as regards our theme of light. Okay, now let's get to work. Looking at the photographs, JFS opened on the site in those photographs in Bell Lane in London's East End in January 1822. And actually, this was the second major manifestation of the school. It had begun life in 1732 in the premises of the Great Synagogue in Duke's Place in the City of London. But the role quickly outgrew that accommodation and it moved to what would be its first real home, a site in Ebenezer Square in the East End, lying between Houndsditch and a thoroughfare called Middlesex Street, which even then was known by its more familiar name of Petticoat Lane, and here it is on the map, circled in that turquoise colour. Once again, accommodation became a problem, and so the school moved at the considerable cost of £4,000, which is roughly £250,000 in today's valuations, and it moved to the Bell Lane site in the photographs we've just seen, where it became the school for the children of Jewish families fleeing persecution in Eastern Europe. There's a similar photograph elsewhere in the museum which has a statement on it telling us that a local clanging bell is the bell of the great Ghetto school, summoning its pupils from the reeking courts and alleys, from the garrets and the cellars, calling them to come and be Anglicized. Well, that's a quotation from Israel Zangel's novel of the 1890s, Children of the Ghetto. And we'll see more about Zangel and Children of the Ghetto in a moment. just to say Children of the Ghetto may have been fiction, but that bell belonged to the barely disguised Jews Free, and it was the school's aim to Anglicise its pupils, and in so doing, to make Englishmen out of Jews. The task of the school nowadays, it is said, is to make Jews out of Englishmen. By the later years of the 19th century, it was estimated that about a third of the East End's Jewish children had been through the school's doors, and by 1900, there were 4,000 pupils on the roll. How on earth they managed a school of that size, I have no idea. But manage it they did, and with astonishing success, I may say, for the Jews Free regularly featured at the top of the academic league tables of the day. The school functioned on the Bell Lane site until Thursday, the 31st of August 1939, when the order to evacuate arrived. In February 1941, the site suffered severe damage from Hitler's bombers, but you can't get rid of JFS that easily, and in 1958, the school reopened on a third home as a state-of-the-art secondary school in Camden Road, but a short bus ride away from this very museum. And then in 2002, at a cost of rather more than the £4,000 that was spent moving it in 1822, the school moved again to another state-of-the-art site, this time in Kenton, in northwest London. Indeed, if you'll forgive me, you might even say that the JFS story is a four-sites saga. As much as they created a school, JFS's founding fathers also created a caring centre, a second family. Many of the boys in these pictures wouldn't have been able to afford the clothes they're wearing had it not been for the charitable trusts which bought them. In 1908, a boy proudly declared in an essay, "Every boy in my class has a clean collar." Well, it may not be clean collars the school buys today, but there is still a welfare system in place which ensures that no student is disenfranchised from participating in school life because of financial necessity. And for this, the school continues to draw on the generosity of trusts, some of which established the school in the 19th century, and some of which, emulating that model, were created later. JFS has always been an innovative school. For instance, in the early 20th century, it piloted vocational education for its students. It printed its own magazine, and we'll see a copy of one shortly, on its own printing press, in its own printing shop. The school also saw itself as having a responsibility for what we now call pastoral care, or well-being. For example, in 1925, Mrs. Leah Teitelbaum, head of the girls' school, established a JFS residential retreat in Seaford on the Sussex coast, where she said students could go for the weekend to refine their social skills. Well, that might have been the party line, but the hidden agenda was much more significant. This retreat allowed these East End children to have a break from the noise, the squalor and the chaos of the area in which they lived. They could never have afforded a holiday by the sea, and Seaford gave them that very opportunity. And before we move on, there's just one other thing I'd like to mention about those days. The vexed topic of homework. Homework, an ongoing source of conflict between children, their parents, and their teachers may be, but the Jews Free demanded it. The parents were more than happy to comply, but where were the boys in these photographs supposed to do their homework? They didn't have desks or private study facilities. For the most part, they lived in cramped conditions where free space was a luxury. Well, in 1909, the Jews Free opened what they called play centres, one for boys, one for girls, and the children could do their homework there after school from 5:30 until 8 o'clock, having, of course, had some tea first. After all, this was a Jewish school. But school was about more than homework, and you could also take violin lessons, or you could do, among other things, drawing, painting, elocution, badminton, embroidery, boxing, puppetry, and of all things, Morris dancing. All activities valuable in themselves, but which could not be fitted into the normal school working day. The Rothschild family, and more of their involvement in the school shortly, paid half of the costs of this project, and the other half came from school funding and the community chest. Interestingly enough, some years ago, we established something at the JFS in Kenton called Extended Activities, where students could stay behind on Mondays after school to take part in activities which, although valuable in themselves, couldn't be fitted into the normal school working day. Activities such as photography, self-defense, classics, drama, and dance. And we thought we were the trailblazers. But now back to the exhibits. Behind us in the museum and to our right are some items connected with Israel Zangwill. Now, I mentioned Zangwill earlier, and he was one of the school's most famous alumni. Israel Zangwill was at the school in the 1870s and 1880s as a pupil, teacher, and teacher, before going on to fame and fortune as one of the period's most eminent literary figures. Often referred to as the Jewish Dickens, he had the ear of the great and the good, and could count H.G. Wells, George Bernard Shaw, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, and Rudyard Kipling amongst his friends. One of the items on display is this copy of Children of the Ghetto, Zangwill's masterpiece, which, when it was published in 1892, created a sensation on both sides of the Atlantic. It became the first Anglo-Jewish bestseller and established Zangwill as the literary voice of Anglo-Jewry. A novel set in the East End of late 19th century London, the Ghetto of the title, Children of the Ghetto gave an inside look into an immigrant community that was almost as mysterious to the more established middle-class Jews of England as it was to the non-Jewish population. The novel provides a compelling analysis of the tensions faced by a generation caught between the ghetto and modern British life. Yet at the same time, it never loses the wry sense of humour and the pathos so typical of European Jewish writers of the time. Sir Hall Caine was a contemporary writer and critic, and he wrote to Zangwill on the novel's publication, telling him that it is wonderful in its reality and force. By this book, you have justified your claim to be classed with the foremost writers of your generation. Praise indeed. Zangwill was also an early Zionist and was among the founders of the Territorialists, a group whose aim was to urgently rescue Jews from oppression by establishing a Jewish homeland somewhere, anywhere in the world, not necessarily in Palestine. Also in this display case, we can see two other items of Zangwill memorabilia. One shows Zangwill's seal, and the other is a commemorative plate. This plate was commissioned by Maurice Meyer, editor of the London Yiddish daily newspaper Die Neue Zeit, the New Times, and presented to Zangwill in commemoration of his robust treatment of a heckler at a public meeting who had abused him by calling him an alien Jew. The plate quotes the response Zangwill threw at the heckler. "I am," he proclaimed, "a Jew, and of course I am proud of it." He then proceeded to tell his audience that his Jewish background had led him to see a good deal of suffering all over the world, but his Englishness had enabled him to appreciate the advantages the English enjoy in the possession of liberty in their constitution. Zangwill was a man very much in the public eye in those days, and although he may, according to Hall Caine, have been one of the foremost writers of his generation, alas, he is rarely read these days. Nonetheless, he lives on, because if you're one of the 370 or so JFS students in Canton with a yellow stripe in your school tie, then you're a member of Zangwill House. If we now look over to what would be the display case on our left, we'll see a medal, the Jews Free School Commemorative Scholarship Medal, it was called. And together with a cheque for £25, it was awarded annually to the outstanding student of the year. Needless to say, Zangwill won it. Actually, being so clever, he won it twice, with back-to-back wins, no less, in 1877 and 1878. This prize was first awarded in 1858 to celebrate the fact that Lionel de Rothschild had become the first practicing Jew to take his seat in the House of Commons, and we can see a picture of Lionel in the gallery. I mentioned the Rothschild family a few moments ago in connection with the play centres, and since you can't really do justice to the JFS story without mentioning them, let's go on a brief detour. The Jews Free was the Rothschilds' favourite charity. And in Children of the Ghetto, Zangwill tells us that Rothschild was a magic name in the ghetto. It stood next to the Almighties as a redresser of grievances and a friend of the poor. The family's involvement with the school wasn't confined to sitting on committees and doling out cash. For sure, they gave the school considerable sums of money, and equally importantly, they encouraged others to do likewise. But they also visited the school, went into classrooms, and met the staff and pupils. Lionel's wife, Charlotte, was especially devoted to the school, and it was said of his brother Anthony, who was elected president of the school in 1847, that he loved JFS as a parent watches the infant he fondly loves. Well, by 1939, 11 members of the House of Rothschild had taken part in the governance of the school, and when Edmund de Rothschild retired as a governor in 1983, it was the first time for more than 150 years that JFS didn't have a Rothschild on its governing body. Nonetheless, the family's connection with and support of the school continues to this day. Indeed, I well remember the current Lord Rothschild touring the school when we were in Camden Town. You have never seen a school get so tidy so quickly. And of course, the school's colours of blue and gold, which are on the school badge, are those of the Rothschild family. And if you look very carefully on the badge, you'll also see the school motto of Ora Vicar, light and honour, which I referred to earlier. After that detour, let's get back to the display cases. And here we can see a JFS school magazine from May 1912. When that magazine was published, and I wonder how many other schools had a school magazine in 1912, Lawrence Bowman was the headmaster of the school. I think it's worth having a few words about Bowman because in many ways he illustrates the type of school that JFS was in those days. Bowman was born in Plock in Poland, came to England as a child, anglicised his name from Laser to Lawrence, and was later naturalised. He arrived at the school at the age of 9 and proved to be a brilliant scholar. Indeed, in 1880, he also won the Commemoration Scholarship, the cheque for £25 and the medal. Bowman was a pupil teacher during the headship of Moses Angel, who was an enormously significant figure in the school's history, before going on to academic success. Bowman was also the first Jew to be awarded a teacher's diploma from London University, and in so doing, became a member of a select club. At that time, there were only 70 such diploma holders in the entire United Kingdom. And in January 1898, Bowman was appointed vice master under Lewis Abrahams, who had succeeded Moses Angel, and he was groomed as the head elect. Bowman became head of the school in October 1907, although it should be said, not without some political infighting. Bowman was a formidable, if rather autocratic figure, and he continued to lead the school as his predecessors had done. However, this didn't suit everybody. One teacher, Sammy Rich, wrote in 1907 that LB's idea of a conference does not differ from the traditional JFS view, that it is an occasion on which the head informs the staff of his intentions and permits no deviation from them. Could have been written last week, couldn't it? Be that as it may. Bowman was head for 23 years, and during that time, he led the school through a complete reorganisation, through the difficulties of the First World War, which sadly claimed the life of his son Claude, who was also a JFS alumnus, and the financial problems that followed it. And by the time he retired in 1930, he'd enjoyed a 55-year connection with the school. Next to the magazine, and from a similar period, is a piece of student needlework. I've already mentioned Moses Angel, a towering and legendary head teacher who led the school for 55 years. Yes, you heard it right. I did say he was headmaster for 55 years. Makes my 29 years look rather feeble, doesn't it? While Angel was of the view that every young woman is the better for knowing how to mend. Well, that thought was obviously taken up by his successors and enshrined in the school's curriculum. Well, for the girls anyway. Like Israel Zangwill, his most famous pupil, Angel is also commemorated with a house of the school in his name and by a stripe in the school tie. In his case, it's a red one. Richly merited reward for a man who dragged an underachieving, ill-disciplined school up by its bootlaces, and with purpose, with an almost obsessive commitment to the cause and with boundless energy, revamped its culture and its expectations so that it became not only one of the finest schools in England, but also arguably the world's leading Jewish school. Well, we're now coming to the end of our brief tour, so once again, let me thank you for joining me. I hope you found the last quarter of an hour or so of some interest, and that you can see how important this school is in the development of the Anglo-Jewish community. Let's not forget, the pupils of the Jews Free had largely grown up in impoverished and often overcrowded homes, where employment was at best erratic and where English was usually a second language. Despite that, however, the school equipped them to take their place both as committed practicing Jews and as loyal English citizens, and its graduates would go on to make considerable contributions to all walks of society. It was truly a remarkable achievement. To conclude, let's go back to the kids in the pictures and leave the last words with another major figure in Anglo-Jewish history. The Reverend Simeon Singer was the editor of the Singer Siddur, the first official Siddur, first official prayer book of the Jewish religious establishment in England. In the early years of the 20th century, following a visit to the school, Singer wrote of the young people he'd met, young people just like those in the photographs. It is little short of a marvel, he said, that from material apparently so unpromising, educational results so extraordinary are produced. And you know, some would say it's not all that different today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David, for such a brilliant object talk today. The Jews Free School forms a really important part of our collection, and it's wonderful to hear about it in light of your own personal connection to the school. And I want to say a big thank you to everybody for watching and joining us for this week's talk. Tomorrow will be the first night of Hanukkah, and we will be releasing daily videos for all of the 8 nights, both family activities and also reflections on Hanukkah lamps in our collection, led by members of different Jewish organisations. And of course, next week there will be another object talk, and this one will be on an object that is very closely linked to the festival of Hanukkah. We will see you there.